Let's start with the director of the movie we just saw and comment on the aspect of the media reporting from your film. What struck you about how the famine of Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and the rest of the Soviet Union was reported in the media of that day, Igor Runov?
Well, I guess not much I can add to that. In terms of relationship to today's reality, you know, when I first heard about the film by Oliver Stone about Vladimir Putin, the first moment I thought about was thinking about Walter Duranty. Although there is no, of course, direct connection, but you can tell that obviously the same techniques has been used in terms of depicting certain realities. Becoming more and more dangerous now with the internet and with the immediate spread of information. It goes really under your skin, and you can, and we all are manipulated in many ways by Facebook, by social networks. I'm not talking about television. So I think that, as I said briefly in the beginning, this film hasn't been shown in Russia yet, and I don't have a lot of hopes that it will be shown for many reasons, but we'll see.
And how about the film Tank Man, which will be shown tomorrow? Give us a preview of that and how the media reported that, whether it was fairly or unfairly in Tiananmen Square.
Well, it certainly depends on which media you're talking about in the case of Tank Man. So the international media actually did a pretty good job. They celebrated that image and spread it around far and wide, and it was quite inspirational in just about every place in the world except the place where it happened, in China, because of the clear, tight control which the government has over the dissemination of information there. They've done any number of different types of spins on it. One time they had shown the footage and they said, they used it as an example of, look at the restraint under which our soldiers act. You know, just what wonderful humanitarian fellas are in the People's Liberation Army, that they chose not to run over this person. And there are other times where they characterized that individual. It's common to hear from Chinese that it was clearly an insane person who walked in front of the tank. But yeah, they really only showed that, as far as I know, on national media in China once. And that was to say that you know, their soldiers are so wonderfully restrained. It's interesting to see now, though, that how little has changed, especially in regards to the protests in Hong Kong. There's just so much misinformation, I would consider it, being spread in China. I was just in Hong Kong and was in some of the protests, and to compare my experience with what you read about in the Chinese papers, or what little is there. But you know, that these are clearly Western instigated alone events. And, yeah, I don't know what the CIA is up to, and none of us probably do. They could have some sort of hand in it, but there's a lot of people, regular people there, millions, that are genuinely going out there and hitting the streets to engage in that. And most, again, this is a situation where a lot of the international press is doing a pretty good job of covering it. But of course, the Chinese press is doing about the same thing they did in 1989.
Well, is there a case to be made, such as the Vietnam War came to our living rooms, which may have contributed to it ending sooner than it might have? In the case that Tiananmen Square was in our living rooms, maybe the carnage was less than it would have been. Maybe China would have cracked down harder were the cameras not there?
That's possible, though. I mean, I think they cracked down about as hard as one could. You know, I mean, the estimates of deaths range from 300, which is, I think, in 2 to 300 is what the official Chinese government Estimates of death are up to 10,000. I think 10,000 might be a little bit strong, but it's probably in the thousands, at least the low thousands. So not an insignificant number of people were killed in that incident. Maybe they had exercised some restraint. I think that judging from the footage, and there was some great recent footage that came out by Arthur Kent out of Canada from 1989, and he recently released it in early May. And to me, it shows that it seems like they have they're not really paying attention to the fact that that was going on. And I wonder now if they aren't that much more guarded, because they recognize the possibility of things being exposed to the world. But they keep such a tight wrap on so many things, it's hard to...
Well, it seems like a short war as opposed to the 10-year cultural revolution in which nobody saw anything behind the rice curtain or whatever you want to call it. And in the Western world, people were kind of revering Mao on the campuses anyway, his little red book and Mao t-shirts and so forth during the Cultural Revolution. I didn't see any real support for Deng Xiaoping's tanks during the Tiananmen Square.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, in the rest of the world, I think was quite disappointing. I think because they saw themselves in the students as well and they weren't just students; they were average citizens out there as well. But I think there was a sympathy, a natural sympathy that people felt for the people who were protesting.
Adam, you were in Iraq with the Marines, and also you came back running for office. What is your idea of the media treatment, both of the war in Iraq and of your run for office here? And you've had some run-ins with the media, haven't you?
Well, I was afraid for a second that I was the only person on this panel who hadn't documented some great socialist historical atrocity, and then I remembered all the videos I did at Occupy Wall Street. So I was also a participant in a great socialist war crime in the rebuilding of Iraq, and at the time, actually, I was kind of disappointed when I was in Fallujah. I was in civil affairs, and I actually wrote a letter to Time magazine for not covering the socialism that we were bringing to Iraq with rebuilding and nation building through the military. But I think what I learned from really all of those experiences, but having been on the inside of one and then being on the outside, and now as a candidate seeing what the motives for the military are. And for people who don't know my background, I did a TV show with RT America for about 4 months before being canceled for political reasons. Imagine Russia today, they don't like it when you're critical of Putin on their TV network, so that didn't go over too well. But then I did an independent podcast and YouTube channel, and having covered all of that, I think what I've gained is a unique appreciation of the motivations of the media. And a lot of us try to really oversimplify the role of the media as a corrupt institution, as a tool of government, as a servant of the establishment. But they're still businesses, and what we see in the decentralization of the opportunity in media with the internet is the motivations behind everybody who participates in media, from business to producers of content to consumers, is a real shift that lays bare those motives. As a libertarian making media, I often felt like I was making a crutch for people who already knew how to walk. In the sense that most people in the United States who consume media don't do it to be informed. It should be no surprise, right? Why do people watch Fox News and MSNBC? It's not because they want to be informed as efficiently as possible and have as comprehensive a worldview and really know what's going on. No, it's because they want to be told, oh, you're right about everything, it's okay, your worldview is correct, go back to sleep, keep going to work and go to the mall and keep going to movies and keep voting for Democrats and Republicans. And that dynamic is shifting so much now. I don't know if that really answers your question, but that's my takeaway, is to see that when you understand that there are those motivations behind those three elements, the business, the content creators, and the consumers of media, you can analyze it and see what those motivations are. So in the past, we can talk about like where we've been at historically. I'm really excited about where we are now, even as a third-party political candidate, that we see now there are opportunities to connect with people like never before.
Great. You know, I went to the Soviet Union, Moscow, and St. Petersburg in 1986, and went with some freedom fighters like Larry Reed and Jerry Pogue and Senator Steve Sims' brother, and a lot of high school students, including my daughter. And we went to Pravda, and boy did we have some great arguments there. And Pravda had all these posters around about Americans sleeping under bridges, homeless, and we had our missiles trained on Russia, and all the propaganda coming out of there. And the movie Tootsie had just came out, and they said, you know, unemployed actors with those beautiful apartments, how can that be? They should be sleeping under bridges. That's propaganda you're putting out in these movies and all that stuff. These great arguments we had. You can imagine these freedom-oriented thinkers. We offered actually all kinds of scholarships for these students to come to America, and of course their handlers wouldn't even hear of anything like that. It was a wonderful trip, but I wonder what it was like growing up in Lithuania, right next door to the Soviet Union, in those times before and after the fall of the Berlin Wall. What kind of propaganda were you getting from the Soviet side, or even in Lithuania there? What was it like?
Sadly enough, Lithuania was not near the Soviet Union, it was in the Soviet Union. I think most people would prefer to be near the Soviet Union. So being in Soviet Union is actually worse, so that's the thing. Yeah, 86, I was 5 at the time, so I do still remember things, so obviously we had...
Can you get the mic a little closer there? Yeah.
Closer or further?
I think so.
Okay, so they had youth magazines, the youth magazine for sort of adolescents about age 10 was called The Little Star, obviously, and it was kind of like a knockoff of Teen Vogue, but without sex and drugs. But that was well, propaganda, if one can say, propaganda well done. They would sort of tap into your natural curiosity and say, well, these guys fighting Nicaragua, what are they? Or why is the criminal regime of the United States supporting those killing squads in Nicaragua and things like that? So Soviets did propaganda pretty well. Now, I'm really sort of don't want to attach a good label to it, but socialists, totalitarians, they're really good at propaganda. There's one thing. And the second thing, I think the West underestimates to what lengths these kind of countries are willing to go to deceive foreigners. We had many, let's say, articles about an American teenager who visited the Soviet Union. Whether she did or not, I don't know. But the fact was this, that all these, youth magazines, they would print how the American teenager was impressed by the level of education in Soviet Union, etc., etc., etc. So I think one lesson to take from all of our experiences, whether it's Soviet Russia, whether it's some of the Russian population right now, or even North Korea and places like that, they're really willing to fool you guys. It's not just, so in the West we can talk about bias. So CNN is one way, Fox is another way. Then we talk about propaganda coming out from the East. It's not a bias, it's a state direction to go that way. There are these places called the troll factories, where the government actually pays money to smear certain people or uphold certain people in social media. And once again, this is not sort of clickbait for Nike commercials. No, this is a clickbait to either sway elections or just sow chaos. Whenever, let's say that if you want to go to the sort of European perspective, many of the extreme or fringe groups or the Eurosceptic fringe groups, they're not freedom fighters fighting against centralized bureaucracy. The reason why they hate, let's say, European Union is not because of bureaucracy, but they want more bureaucracy, which currently they cannot have because of European Union regulations. So I think that thinking of it in these terms, especially from the freedom side, that we might dislike our own government sometimes, we might have some critique towards it, and I think we should. But if we treat our government critically, we should also take other governments critically as well. So, enemy of my enemy is still my enemy. That's the sort of Middle Eastern way of looking at things.
And you can begin lining up for questions now, but I have one general question for any one of the panelists. Bringing it up to the present, how do you see the media bias in terms of various atrocities, and One would be in terrorist groups. Is Antifa being given a free ride, for instance? And how about the atrocities against Christians around the world? Is that being ignored versus any atrocities against Muslims or Jews or any other group? Is there a double standard in the reporting about violence around the world in various media outlets? Anybody want to tackle that one?
Well, just real quickly on that, certainly in the United States, and I love that you said Antifa, because I hear Antifa, and I'm actually looking for more ways to mispronounce their name, if anybody has any good ones to troll them back. But yeah, there's a sort of veneer of political correctness that you can put on in the United States that still has, and as much as I would condemn Trump's statism, I can appreciate how he has genuinely challenged that sort of political correctness that still dominates and still is a force, and anybody can kind of, put that on and say, no, I'm a minority and I'm defending the politically correct and that I'm an SJW and it does, kind of get people to back off still in general if you can say like, oh, well, I'm being righteous because I'm being politically correct. I'd like to think that's fading.
Okay, anybody else?
I think it's Antifa, if you're looking for monikers, so what would be like anti-First Amendment. But I think it's worse than political correctness. Political correctness, whether we like it or not, and I myself don't, that usually involves words or verbal outrage. What's happening with Antifa today, they have graduated from verbal assault to physical assault. And the people actually getting beat up. Journalists are getting beat up, and definitely CNN just had I think CNN, to their credit, they did a report on that, but it was one. Well, imagine, let's say, if we beat up a journalist here. I mean, that would be all over the news. I mean, we would never do it. But yes, I think there is a degree of double standard. Some people still think, well, maybe they are misguided anti-fascists. No, they are the fascists themselves, and they use the guise of political correctness to say that they're defending free speech, and they're not. And the worst thing, watch a new movie, Robin Hood of 2018. Now, if that is not a sort of Antifa swan song, I don't know what is. It's an awful movie, but the imagery is very clear. It's it's fight against the rich, and the sort of the ending battle cry of the movie. That the Robin Hood, he says, "Aren't we all up for some wealth redistribution?" Awful movie.
Well, hey, I'm glad you built on what I said there. It's a really good point, and I think I would take it to the next level here and say that the political correctness that I'm describing is not just about terminology or ideology. It's a culture of kind of emotional manipulation and emotional bullying. And that's really what Antifa and the people who are politically correct in that SJW crowd rely on. That you're wrong, you're a bad person, or you're the asshole if you don't respect my feels.
Sure.
One thing, if I just to give some credit where I do think it is due to our modern liberal media, is that they are still willing to attack, let's say, if I'm speaking about China specifically, in the 80s and now, their totalitarian aspects. They're willing to take to task their violations of freedom of speech, freedom of press, and all sorts of other aspects that compose that. Now, certainly, the socialism and the communism in the economic sphere don't seem to bother them that much, and that's obviously where we part ways. But I am grateful that they aren't willing to just give China a pass on that just because they're nominally communist.
Right. Igor, comments?
Just a general note on the role of the film, since we started talking about it. Some of you may remember that in the late 70s there was a serial with Meryl Streep called Holocaust. This film was shown, it's about the family of Jews. This film was shown in Germany. And believe it or not, it was seen in a very short period of time by 20 million people. And it created the whole discussion inside society about the role of Nazism, because until late 70s, there was still, you were not ashamed to remember of your Nazi past. And many other strange things happens. In many ways, it resembles me what's happening in the Russia now. What happened in Germany in the late 70s and 80s. But this film itself created such a shocking effect on society, which made it to reconsider its past, and people started taking their personal responsibility, although they were not part of the Nazism, but they considered it as their personal fault, their family fault. And from that time, I think the whole issue of Holocaust became a global phenomenon. But importantly for Germany, Germany became a very, I wouldn't call it pacifist, but very peaceful nation after starting two world wars. And I think that now it's time maybe to do a similar film. I don't know how to do it. I know that there are a few people in California who are considering it, but to do a film about communism, about socialism and communism, globally about its role and about its guilt before the mankind.
First questioner.
Yes. I have a son who's been traveling a lot around different countries between work, and he happened to be very recently in Hong Kong, and then he went to Beijing. And he visited Tiananmen Square, and he was actually able to zap us a video that was just sort of shocking, even though it was 30 years ago. And the video was, I believe it was like an Aussie guy. He had an accent, whatever, and he was talking about it. And he talked about how gruesome it was, way worse than anybody has been told, where the tanks would not only go over the people, but then they would back up over the people to get them as flat as they could, so that the bulldozer could bulldoze them and they would incinerate the bodies. And I just didn't know if you have knowledge of that or can verify if that's accurate or not. And I also, and my real quick question was, do you know if the fellow that was obviously in that film in front of that tank later on got, run over or whatever? It was off camera. Robert?
Yeah, I wasn't there, so I have no eyewitness testimony on it. But from what you're describing, it sounds to me that is likely what happened. That basically they were incinerated, put in mass graves, things like that. I mean, they just were scraping up the bodies afterwards. It was really just,
And what I recall, I think the number was close to 10,000 that was in that video or whatever.
Yeah,
more than the 300 or 400.
It's one of the estimates. I think it might be a little farther out than. There's only kind of one source that gives that estimate, and it seemed rather hasty afterwards. So, it's not impossible, but it might be a little extreme. But regardless, it was a not insignificant number of people. As far as that gentleman, we don't know. We see him kind of being guided off of the road by some other fellas. There are some people who say that was the secret police, and that he would have been disappeared from them. I like the response that if you watch the footage, the secret police never would have been so gentle with him in the way in which these people were kind of guiding him off. So I'd like to, I stick with the story that it was people who were like, okay, but you did your thing, get out of here before you get into any more trouble. We don't know though. There's all sorts of speculations, but none of it's been confirmed. Some people say he's a guy working in Taiwan, but we just don't know.
Thanks for your take, and looking forward to the film tomorrow.
Thank you.
Right. Next question.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to Tankman tomorrow as well. I spoke with Robert earlier. I have a unique history. I was a Maoist communist leader and led a trip to communist China when I was 26 years old and met with the communist leadership. So I have a pretty unique perspective on it. But my question I'd like to ask the whole panel is, besides the media, with the tech companies in particular, Google and Facebook, what role are they playing in propping up and supporting communist countries like communist China? I know there's a conversation going on now where Peter Thiel has raised that question, in particular with Google, but I think there's a lot that these tech companies are doing to support these communist regimes, and obviously this money is the big reason for it, but I'd love your opinion on all that. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't want to comment on those specifics, but one thing that I've observed in just seeing the large tech companies interact with government is that we know that governments put pressure on them. We know that governments have demands of them. Even in the United States, even in Europe, we see it's very open, and we have to assume that in governments that are more closed off, that process is happening in a more closed off way. And fundamentally, what that means is that the people who will control those large corporate entities are the ones who are willing to play ball. You know, I don't know, this is, you know, there's some rumors going around recently that even Mark Zuckerberg, having taken technology from MySpace, wasn't really the originator of that, and that, you know, that was a creation of something where government saw, hey, here's this technology, here's this social media concept, and MySpace is blowing up, and we need to control this. Well, let's get our version 2.0 out there with our, you know, puppet who we can control, perhaps. And again, like you look at Google as the leader there, we've seen the support of the heads of Google for Hillary Clinton, for various Democratic causes. And I don't know if that's their intent or if it's someone goes to them. And we all know the rumors about the Clintons, right? You know, if they come to you with a gun in the night and say you're going to do this or you're going to die, they have some credibility in saying that. And I think the people who end up in control of those tech companies, like I said, are the ones who are willing to play ball. And you have to put yourself in their shoes and say, like, if you were the one who created that and was responsible for that technology, and someone said, well, we'll let you nominally be in charge, but you're going to do what we say now because you're too big to allow to actually be a free market entity. You're now essentially going to be an extension of government control. Same thing happens in China. Of course, in China, it's worse where they have the direct monopolies over social media with, you know, it's the state version of Facebook, the state version of Twitter. So, you know, and what you see there is the consequence as, you know, what comes to the surface when you have dissidents with forced confessions on TV in order to stay out of jail. It's a scale worse. So yeah, you can see the elephant in the room with the sheet over it. You can still see the outline and feel all of that. I think if you put those couple pieces together, you can see the answer to your question is as horrendous as you might have imagined.
Well, I would think it's even worse. So censorship.
I'm giving him credit for having a good imagination.
Censorship is something done by force. So let's say if you're a journalist and you write a piece and it gets censored out, well, I mean, you stay true to your principles. Someone above you remove that piece. So I mean, as a person, you have a spine and you're a proud person. But self-censorship, and I think what we are sort of seeing these days, a lot of self kind of censorship. You know, it's much easier to play ball than to live up to your principles. It's much easier to be that nice guy who shakes hands with foreign leaders rather than confronts them. So I think if we're going to lose liberty, it's not through censorship, because we can avoid that, but it's through self-censorship. That, I think, is actually the bigger problem right now.
For more on that, we have a film on Saturday. It's called The Creepy Line, about Google and Facebook. We have time for one more question.
I'm going to change the subject a little bit. How many of you all have heard of a lady named Annie Jacobson? She's written a book called Operation Paperclip. Her information has to do with the 10 to 12,000 Nazi scientists who came to America after World War II. One of them was Werner von Braun, who was an SS officer and was involved in all kinds of Holocaust items. My question for you is, they came here for two purposes. One, for the rocket program. That was number one, why they brought the scientists here. Number two was to introduce mind control to our government. So think about this. MK Ultra, what happened with the LSD in the military in the 1960s. So what I'm curious about, the 5G that's coming out, is the completion of that program for mind control on the population of our people. If you don't know about 5G, it's not a good thing. It's terrible, but comment on what you think about the Nazis coming here, our government giving them cover, giving them a witness protection program, and using all their medical experiments, which have been sealed, the Japanese medical experiments. You can't even see, they're all been sealed by the government. Comment on that, please.
Anyone know about that?
I don't know much about that. I do know that there are some concerns about like who's coming over from China currently. You know who the students are, whether they're students, and you know what they may be doing while here. On top of that, there are these groups that the Chinese government has set up called the Confucius Institutes on various campuses. And what they basically do is keep track of what their students are doing, hearing, how they're behaving, what their response is. And it's creating a great chilling effect on their international students particularly obviously the ones who maybe are coming here with nothing but the intent to learn. Professors I know have told me that sometimes they will get a very enthusiastic student who may be, citing freedom ideas, and the other students will be silent because they don't want to get in trouble. They don't want to get associated with that person if that person really is some rebellious, freedom-loving person, or that person may be a narc and that they're trying to ferret out people who are in opposition to the Chinese regime. So it's very disconcerting just how deep the Chinese government influence is. And to get back to John's question briefly, the Chinese state version of Facebook was shut down from June 1st to about June 7th. It just so happens that June 4th, the anniversary of Tiananmen Square, falls in the middle of that. It was shut down for maintenance that entire time. This is like a regular occurrence now. I mean, because you cannot mention, there's an alcohol brand that has 6-4 in their label, June 4th. They've been shut down and prosecuted for basically crimes against the state, just for having those numbers on it. Now, it was certainly, they were intending to have the message that the government thought. But I mean, that's how deep this runs.
We need to break for the next, but I'll give Adam the last word.
Well, when I was in the Marines, I volunteered for the MK Ultra program. Anybody want to guess what my trigger word is? No? Okay. No, I appreciate your question, but I guess not enough fans of MK Ultra here. Okay, we got some in the back. Yeah, okay, thanks, Dean. Well, to what you said about the effect of World War II, the Germans that came afterwards to support the military-industrial complex in the United States, there's a lot of covert stuff, and I make a joke about MK Ultra very deliberately to point out in contrast what we experience as dehumanization of the enemy in our training, where we were taught to use racial slurs, we were taught to shoot at body-sized target, body-shaped targets, and you've probably all heard the statistic that from World War I through the modern era, the rate at which soldiers in combat actually pull the trigger on the enemy combatants has gone up as a result of conditioning. And it's a direct, overt mind control that they engage in, where in World War I it was something like only 10-20% of the soldiers actually shot to kill the enemy. The rest were shooting to miss, shooting over their heads, things like this. It's so against our nature and instinct to take the lives of another human being on behalf of the government, especially in that circumstance. And it's taking the conditioning improvements and techniques of how you get soldiers to kill over the past 100 years. It's gotten that rate up to like 90+%. When we saw, I think it was Gulf War I, they used as the comparative statistic in that analysis. And what we see now is that dehumanization is only capable, or is only possible in isolation, when they're able to isolate you. When I was and to bring us back to the subject of the media, in the chow halls in Iraq, they were playing Fox News. And Fox News was too fair and balanced. So they had to change it to the Armed Forces Network. All propaganda, all the time. And that isolation is not possible anymore in the age of the internet. And to your point, Zilvinas, about the self-censorship, as much as that is a threat, the manipulation that we see around the margins from social media censorship, and I know Ford Fisher is here, another person who should have been on this panel, great independent media personality who's done a great job covering a lot of the public conflict on the fringes of late, that there is censorship, there is demonetization, there is in all these social media networks information being taken down. But again, if you look at the historical perspective, if you look at what was possible in the past, that kind of censorship just doesn't fly anymore. We live in a world where the truth button is one click away. You can find that out. And the dehumanization that is made possible because of that condition, because of government, even that, the internet, that free flow of information, the ability to connect, They've wanted a war with Iran for how long now? But you can Skype somebody in Iran and say, oh, hey, do you all hate all of us because of our freedom? Oh no, they're lying to us about that too. How about that? The internet is a humanizing effect that counters all of the dehumanization, that conditioning and the manipulation of the media that makes these atrocities possible. It's going away. We live in a beautiful world. I think we're coming to the end of that era of information control.
Good point. We have to thank the panel now. We'll take away the next speaker.